The world watched with bated breath as the night sky over Israel lit up with the fiery trails of 181 Iranian missiles. This wasn't just another conflict in a long-standing feud. It was a dangerous escalation, a stark warning of the potential for a much wider conflict. The sheer scale of the attack, unprecedented in recent memory, sent shockwaves through the international community. Governments around the world scrambled to respond, issuing condemnations and calling for restraint. The attack shattered any illusion of peace, however fragile, that existed between Iran and Israel. It laid bare the deep-seated animosity and mistrust that has fueled this conflict for decades. The silence of the night was broken by the deafening roar of explosions as the missiles rained down on Israeli cities. Families huddled in bomb shelters, their fear palpable as they prayed for safety. The world held its breath, waiting to see how Israel would respond. Would this be the spark that ignites a full-blown war? A conflict with the potential to engulf the entire Middle East? The stakes couldn't be higher. The eyes of the world were fixed on Jerusalem, the epicenter of this ancient conflict, now on the brink of a new and terrifying chapter. The world watched and waited, praying for peace but bracing for the worst. Many turned to the Bible, seeking answers in its prophecies, wondering if these events were signs of the end times. The prophecies spoke of wars and rumors of wars as mentioned in Matthew 24:6, and the faithful looked to the skies, anticipating the return of Jesus, as foretold in the scriptures. Ezekiel 38:1-6 describes a great battle involving Gog and Magog, often interpreted as a reference to a future conflict involving Israel and its enemies. Daniel 9:27 speaks of a covenant being broken, and the abomination of desolation, events that many believe are linked to the end times and the return of Jesus. For many, this latest attack is not just a geopolitical event. It is a chilling echo of ancient prophecies, a signpost pointing towards a final apocalyptic showdown as foretold in the Bible. Throughout history, the land of Israel has been a battleground, a crucible where empires clashed and civilizations rose and fell, just as the Bible predicted. From the Roman conquest to the Crusades, the land has been soaked in blood, a testament to the enduring power of faith and the enduring tragedy of conflict, echoing the prophecies of wars and rumors of wars. Now, as the world watches with a mixture of fascination and dread, the age-old conflict between Israel and its neighbors takes on a new urgency, seen by many as a sign of the end times. Some believe that these events are not merely coincidental, but rather the fulfillment of ancient prophecies, harbingers of a coming tribulation and the eventual return of Jesus Christ. The very ground on which this conflict is being fought is steeped in religious significance, adding a layer of complexity that transcends the political and the military, as foretold in the scriptures. The Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, a remnant of the ancient Jewish temple, stands as a silent witness to millennia of history and prophecy. It has seen empires rise and fall, witnessed the birth of religions, and endured countless conflicts, all pointing towards the prophesied end times. Now, as the missiles fly and the world watches, it stands as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the enduring power of belief as we await the return of Jesus. For some, the current conflict is not just about land or power. It is about something far greater, something that speaks to the very essence of their faith and the fate of humanity itself as prophesied in the Bible. The Bible specifically mentions the involvement of nations like Persia, modern-day Iran, in the end times. Ezekiel 38:39 describes a coalition of nations, including Persia, coming against Israel. Daniel 11 speaks of a northern king clashing with Israel. And Matthew 24 outlines signs of wars, famines, and earthquakes as precursors to the return of Jesus. These prophecies are seen by many as unfolding before our very eyes, adding a profound sense of urgency and spiritual significance to the ongoing conflict between Iran and Israel. The roots of the Iran-Israel conflict run deep, entwined with the very fabric of the Middle East's tumultuous history. This isn't just a modern-day clash of ideologies, it's a centuries-old saga marked by territorial disputes, religious differences, and a complex web of alliances and betrayals. To understand the current crisis, we must journey back in time to a land steeped in ancient grudges and simmering resentments. The story begins long before the modern states of Iran and Israel even existed. For millennia, the region has been a crossroads of civilizations, a battleground where empires collided and cultures intertwined. The land itself, considered holy by Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, has been a constant source of friction, its sacred sites claimed by competing faiths and its ownership fiercely contested. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948, while a momentous occasion for the Jewish people, ignited a firestorm in the region. Arab nations, including Iran, then known as Persia, viewed it as an encroachment on their territory and a threat to the Palestinian people. War erupted almost immediately, setting the stage for decades of conflict and mistrust. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War, followed by the Six-Day War in 1967 and the Yom Kippur War in 1973, solidified the divide between Israel and its neighbors. Each conflict left behind a bitter legacy of bloodshed and displacement, further entrenching the animosity and making any prospect of lasting peace seem like a distant dream. The seeds of the current crisis were sown in these early conflicts, taking root in a soil fertilized by generations of pain and resentment. According to Bible prophecies, such as those found in the books of Ezekiel and Daniel, these conflicts are seen as signs of the end times, a period of great tribulation and turmoil. Ezekiel 38:39 speaks of a great battle involving Gog and Magog, often interpreted as a coalition of nations including Iran coming against Israel. Many believe that the return of Jesus will bring an end to these conflicts, ushering in an era of peace and divine justice. As tensions continue to rise, the faithful look to these prophecies for hope, believing that the ultimate resolution lies in the hands of a higher power. The year 1979 marked a turning point in Iran-Israel relations, casting a long shadow that continues to darken the present day. The Iranian Revolution, which toppled the pro-Western Shah and brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power, fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. Overnight, Iran transformed from a secular monarchy into an Islamic republic, its foreign policy driven by a potent mix of religious fervor and anti-Western sentiment. Khomeini, a charismatic but deeply anti-Israel cleric, made no secret of his hostility towards the Jewish state. He viewed Israel as an illegitimate entity, a cancerous tumor that needed to be excised from the Middle East. This rhetoric, infused with religious zeal, resonated deeply with Iran's conservative population and quickly became a cornerstone of the Islamic Republic's foreign policy. The new Iranian regime withdrew its recognition of Israel and severed all diplomatic ties. Financial and military support was channeled to Palestinian militant groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, further inflaming tensions with Israel. The Iranian Revolution had unleashed a new and dangerous dynamic in the region, one where religious ideology and state-sponsored terrorism became powerful weapons in the ongoing struggle for regional dominance. The consequences of this shift were immediate and far-reaching. The hostage crisis at the US Embassy in Tehran, which began just months after the revolution, further poisoned relations between Iran and the West, pushing the United States firmly into Israel's corner. The Middle East, once a battleground for Cold War proxy conflicts, was now locked in a new struggle, one where the battle lines were drawn along religious and ideological fault lines. According to Bible prophecies, the turmoil in the Middle East is a sign of the end times where nations will rise against Israel. Ezekiel 38:39 speak of a great battle involving Israel and a coalition of nations, including Persia, which is modern-day Iran. These events are seen as precursors to the return of Jesus, as foretold in the scriptures. Matthew 24:6-7 mentions wars and rumors of wars, nation rising against nation and kingdom against kingdom as signs of the end times. The Bible speaks of a time when Jesus will return to establish his kingdom, bringing peace and justice to a world in chaos. Revelation 19:11. 16 describes Jesus returning as a conquering king to defeat the forces of evil. For many believers, the current conflict is not just a geopolitical struggle, but a fulfillment of ancient prophecies, heralding the ultimate redemption and the return of the Messiah. The decades following the Iranian Revolution witnessed a steady escalation of tensions between Iran and Israel, punctuated by periods of heightened conflict and near-war scenarios. This timeline of key events paints a stark picture of a relationship locked in a dangerous spiral of animosity and mistrust, each incident adding fuel to the fire and pushing the two nations closer to the brink. 1982 to 1988. Iran provides crucial support to Hezbollah during the Lebanon War, further solidifying its role as a major backer of anti-Israel militant groups. 1990s. Iran accelerates its nuclear program, raising alarm bells in Israel and the West, who fear the development of nuclear weapons capability. 2000s, the Second Intifada and the outbreak of the Syrian civil war provide fertile ground for Iranian proxy forces to operate, further destabilizing the region and increasing the risk of a direct confrontation with Israel. According to Bible prophecies, such as those found in Ezekiel 38 and 39, these escalating tensions are seen as signs of the end times, with many believing that these conflicts fulfill the prophecy of Gog and Magog, heralding the return of Jesus. As foretold in the scriptures, particularly in the book of Revelation, the return of Jesus is anticipated to bring peace and resolution to these enduring conflicts. At the heart of the Iran-Israel conflict lies a deep-seated fear, the specter of a nuclear-armed Iran. For Israel, a small nation surrounded by adversaries, the prospect of a hostile neighbor possessing such devastating weapons is an existential threat. The memory of the Holocaust, a horrific testament to the dangers of unchecked hatred, weighs heavily on the Israeli psyche, fueling a determination to prevent another genocide at all costs. Iran, for its part, insists that its nuclear program is purely for peaceful purposes, intended to meet its energy needs and advance its scientific development. However, Israel and much of the international community view this claim with deep skepticism. The Iranian government's history of concealing elements of its nuclear program, coupled with its fiery rhetoric towards Israel, has fueled suspicions that its true intentions are far from benign. The 2015 nuclear deal, formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, offered a glimmer of hope, a potential pathway to easing tensions and preventing a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. However, the Trump administration's decision to withdraw from the agreement in 2018 and reimpose crippling sanctions on Iran dealt a severe blow to the deal's fragile progress. The current escalation of tensions can be seen in part as a consequence of the JCPOA's unraveling. With the diplomatic path seemingly blocked and economic pressure mounting, Iran may feel compelled to escalate its nuclear activities as a bargaining chip or, in a worst-case scenario, as a prelude to developing a nuclear weapon. This dangerous game of brinkmanship has brought the region to a precipice, with the potential for miscalculation or unintended consequences looming large. According to Bible prophecies, the escalating tensions and the threat of nuclear conflict are seen as signs of the end times. The book of Revelation speaks of wars and rumors of wars, nations rising against nations, and the potential for widespread destruction. Many believe that these events are paving the way for the return of Jesus, as foretold in the scriptures. The prophecies suggest that in the midst of global turmoil, a divine intervention will bring about a new era of peace and righteousness. The book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, speaks of a great battle involving Gog and Magog, often interpreted as a coalition of nations including Iran coming against Israel in the last days. The book of Daniel also contains prophecies about end-time kingdoms and conflicts, with many scholars seeing parallels to modern-day geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. Zechariah 12. Three prophecies that Jerusalem will become a burdensome stone for all nations, a focal point of conflict, which many see reflected in the current Iran-Israel tensions. These prophecies collectively point to a time of great upheaval, but also to the hope of Jesus' return, bringing an end to conflict and establishing a kingdom of peace. The Iran-Israel conflict extends far beyond the borders of the two nations, playing out in a complex web of proxy wars and power struggles across the Middle East. According to Bible prophecies, these conflicts are seen as signs of the end times, specifically in Ezekiel 38:39, where a coalition of nations, including Persia, modern-day Iran, will rise against Israel. Iran, seeking to expand its influence and weaken its rivals, has cultivated a network of allied militias and political movements throughout the region, from the battlefields of Syria to the streets of Lebanon and Yemen. This aligns with the prophecies in Ezekiel 38:39, where a coalition of nations, including Persia, modern-day Iran, will rise against Israel. Hezbollah, the powerful Lebanese Shia militant group, stands as a prime example of Iran's strategy of asymmetric warfare. The Bible warns of wars and rumors of wars in Matthew 24:6, which many believe is reflected in these ongoing conflicts. Armed, funded, and trained by Iran, Hezbollah poses a significant threat to Israel's northern border, possessing a vast arsenal of rockets and missiles capable of striking deep within Israeli territory. This constant state of tension is seen by some as a precursor to the return of Jesus, as foretold in the scriptures, particularly in Matthew 24:30, where the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. In Syria, Iran's intervention in the civil war, alongside its allies in Russia and the Assad regime, has allowed it to establish a military foothold on Israel's doorstep. The involvement of these nations is often linked to the prophecy of the Gog and Magog war in Ezekiel 38, where a great battle will take place in the end times. This presence, viewed by Israel as a direct threat to its security, has led to numerous Israeli airstrikes targeting Iranian assets and personnel within Syria. These events are seen by some as part of the birth pains mentioned in Matthew 24:8, signaling the nearing of the end times. Iran's support for Hamas in the Gaza Strip, another heavily armed Palestinian militant group, further complicates the regional security landscape. The Bible speaks of a time when nations will rise against each other, as seen in Mark 13:8, which many interpret as a sign of the approaching end times. While Hamas and Fatah, the two main Palestinian factions, have been locked in a bitter internal struggle, Iran has exploited this division to maintain its influence within the Palestinian cause, further fueling the cycle of violence and instability. This division and strife are often interpreted as signs of the end times, as described in Luke 21:10, where nation will rise against nation. For Iran, these proxy forces serve multiple purposes. They allow it to project power and undermine its enemies without risking direct confrontation with Israel or the United States. This strategy is seen by some as part of the spiritual warfare described in Ephesians 6:12, where our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, authorities, and powers of this dark world. They provide a cost-effective means of bleeding Israel through a war of attrition, and they bolster Iran's image as a champion of the Palestinian cause and a bulwark against Western imperialism in the region. Many believe these events are leading up to the return of Jesus, as prophesied in Revelation 19:11-16, where Jesus returns as a warrior to judge and wage war. While geopolitical calculations undoubtedly play a significant role in Iran's decision-making, it's crucial to recognize the influence of domestic pressures and internal political dynamics. These events also resonate with biblical prophecies about the end times, such as the turmoil described in Matthew 24:6-7, where Jesus speaks of wars and rumors of wars, and nation will rise against nation. The Islamic Republic, despite its image as a monolithic entity, is not immune to the complexities of factionalism, public opinion, and the need for political survival. The Bible speaks of nations in turmoil and leaders grappling for power as signs of the end times, echoing the prophecy in Daniel 2:41-43 about divided kingdoms. Iran's economy, battered by years of sanctions and mismanagement, is in dire straits. This economic hardship aligns with the biblical prophecy of widespread distress among nations, as mentioned in Luke 21:25-26, where distress of nations with perplexity is foretold. Inflation is rampant, unemployment is high, and the value of the Iranian rial has plummeted. Such economic woes are often seen as precursors to the prophesied tribulations, reminiscent of Revelation 6:6, which speaks of economic hardship during the end times. This economic hardship has fueled widespread discontent among the Iranian people, leading to sporadic protests and a growing sense of frustration with the ruling elite. The Bible foretells of unrest and rebellion as signs of the approaching end times, as seen in 2 Timothy 3:1, 5, which describes perilous times and societal breakdown. In this context, external conflicts can serve as a convenient distraction, a means of redirecting public anger away from domestic problems and towards a common enemy. This mirrors the biblical narrative of nations rising against each other, as prophesied in Zechariah 12:2-3, where Jerusalem becomes a cup of trembling to surrounding nations. By rallying the population against the perceived threat from Israel, the Iranian government can shore up its legitimacy, portraying itself as a defender of Islam and a bulwark against foreign aggression. This aligns with the prophecy of nations uniting against Israel in the end times, as described in Psalm 83:4-8, where a coalition of nations conspires against Israel. Furthermore, the Iranian political landscape is marked by a power struggle between hardliners, who favor a confrontational approach towards the West and Israel, and more moderate voices who advocate for greater engagement and diplomacy. This internal strife is reminiscent of the biblical prophecy of division within nations, as seen in Mark 3:24-25, where a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. Escalating tensions with Israel can serve the interests of the hardline faction, allowing them to consolidate their power, silence dissent, and advance their agenda. The Bible speaks of wars and rumors of wars as signs of the end times, as mentioned in Matthew 24:6. It's also worth noting that the Iranian leadership may be motivated by a desire to test the resolve of the new US administration. This geopolitical maneuvering is seen by some as part of the unfolding end-time scenario, aligning with the prophecy in Ezekiel 38:39 about a great conflict involving Israel and its adversaries. With President Biden having signaled a willingness to rejoin the nuclear deal under certain conditions, Iran may be seeking to increase its leverage in any future negotiations by demonstrating its capacity and willingness to escalate tensions. These developments are watched closely by those who believe they herald the return of Jesus as foretold in the Bible, particularly in Revelation 16:16, which speaks of the gathering of nations for the final battle at Armageddon. The Iran-Israel conflict unfolds against the backdrop of a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape, marked by shifting alliances, emerging power centers, and a growing sense of uncertainty about the future world order. According to Bible prophecies, these events are signs of the end times as foretold in the scriptures. In Matthew 24:7, it is written, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." The traditional alliances that once defined the Middle East are being redrawn, creating new opportunities and challenges for both Iran and Israel. The Bible speaks of nations rising against nations, a clear indication of the turmoil we see today. Ezekiel 38:5-6 mentions Persia, modern-day Iran, aligning with other nations against Israel. The Abraham Accords, a series of normalization agreements between Israel and several Arab states, including the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco, have significantly altered the regional balance of power. These accords can be seen as part of the prophetic alignment of nations in the last days. Isaiah 19:23-25 speaks of a future where Israel, Egypt, and Assyria, modern-day Middle Eastern nations, will be united in peace. These agreements, brokered by the Trump administration, reflect a shared concern about Iran's growing influence and a desire to forge closer ties with Israel as a strategic partner. This aligns with the prophecy of Israel becoming a focal point in global politics. Zechariah 12:3 states, "On that day, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations." For Iran, the Abraham Accords represent a setback, undermining its efforts to portray itself as the champion of the Palestinian cause and isolating it further from its Arab neighbors. The Bible mentions the isolation of certain nations in the end times, which could be reflective of Iran's current situation. Ezekiel 38:10-12 describes a time when Israel will be attacked by a coalition of nations, including Persia. The agreements have also opened the door for increased security cooperation between Israel and its new Arab partners, potentially creating a united front against Iranian aggression. This unity among nations against a common adversary is another sign of the times. Daniel 11:40, 45 speaks of a king of the north and a king of the south clashing in the end times, which some interpret as a reference to Middle Eastern conflicts. The Biden administration's approach to the Middle East represents another wildcard in the equation. While President Biden has expressed a commitment to re-engaging with Iran diplomatically, he has also affirmed the United States' ironclad commitment to Israel's security. The Bible foretells of alliances and conflicts that will shape the end times, and the US-Israel relationship is a key part of this narrative. Revelation 16:14. 16 speaks of a gathering of nations for a great battle, often associated with Armageddon. How the Biden administration navigates this complex web of relationships and manages the competing interests of its allies and rivals will be crucial in determining the trajectory of the Iran-Israel conflict. These decisions could hasten the fulfillment of end-time prophecies. Matthew 24:6 warns, "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come." Adding to the complexity is the evolving relationship between the United States and China. As the US and China jostle for global influence, the Middle East has become a key arena of competition, with both powers seeking to secure access to energy resources and build strategic partnerships. The Bible speaks of wars and rumors of wars, and the struggle for dominance in the Middle East is a testament to this prophecy. Revelation 6:4 describes a rider on a red horse, symbolizing war and conflict. Iran, seeking to reduce its isolation and counter US pressure, has increasingly turned to China as a potential economic and political ally. This alliance could be seen as part of the prophetic alliances mentioned in the Bible. Ezekiel 38:2-6 lists nations that will align against Israel, which some interpret as including modern-day alliances. In this fluid and unpredictable environment, both Iran and Israel are seeking to adapt to the changing geopolitical realities and advance their interests. The Bible indicates that such times of uncertainty will precede the return of Jesus. Matthew 24:30 says, "Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." The outcome of this rivalry will have profound implications not only for the Middle East but also for the broader international system. As we witness these events unfold, we are reminded of the Bible's prophecies and the imminent return of Jesus, bringing hope and redemption to a troubled world. Revelation 22:12 promises, "Look, I am coming soon. My reward is with me, and I will give to each person according to what they have done." The world braced itself for Israel's response, a moment many believe was foretold in Bible prophecies, particularly in Ezekiel 38 and 39. The missile attack, a brazen act of aggression, demanded a firm and decisive reaction, echoing the wars and rumors of wars mentioned in Matthew 24:6, where Jesus warned of conflicts as signs of the end times. Anything less would be perceived as weakness, an invitation for further attacks, reminiscent of the Gog and Magog conflict described in Ezekiel 38, where a coalition of nations, including Persia, modern-day Iran, would rise against Israel. Yet Israel also had to tread carefully, aware that a full-blown war would have catastrophic consequences for the entire region, aligning with the end-time signs of widespread destruction as depicted in Revelation 16:16, the Battle of Armageddon. The Israeli Defense Forces, renowned for their military prowess and swift retaliation, immediately launched airstrikes against targets inside Iran, reminiscent of the swift judgments described in Isaiah 17:1. These strikes, carefully calibrated to minimize civilian casualties, focused on military installations, weapons depots, and facilities linked to Iran's nuclear program, echoing the precision and divine judgment seen in Zechariah 12:9. The message was clear. Israel would not be intimidated and would respond forcefully to any aggression, a stance that some see as part of the prophetic battles leading to the return of Jesus, as described in Revelation 19:11-16. However, despite the calls for vengeance from some quarters, Israel exercised a degree of restraint, mindful of the prophecy in Matthew 24:22, where Jesus spoke of the days being shortened for the sake of the elect. The scale of the retaliation, while significant, was not as overwhelming as some had feared. aligning with the prophecy in Isaiah 26:20, where people are called to hide for a little while until the wrath has passed. This measured response, a calculated blend of strength and caution, aimed to deter further attacks without triggering an uncontrollable escalation, reflecting the wisdom in Proverbs 21:31. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord. The world watched this delicate dance between retaliation and restraint with bated breath, aware of the prophetic implications, particularly those in Daniel 9:27 regarding a covenant with many. The situation remained volatile, a tinderbox awaiting another spark, as foretold in the apocalyptic visions of Revelation 6:4, where peace is taken from the earth. Every statement from leaders, every movement of troops, was scrutinized for signs of what might come next, as believers looked to the skies for the return of Jesus, as described in Acts 1:11. The fate of the region and perhaps the world hung in the balance as believers looked to the skies for the return of Jesus, fulfilling the prophecy in Revelation 22:20. He who testifies to these things says, "Yes, I am coming soon." The international community, shaken by the sudden eruption of violence, scrambled to respond to the crisis, a scenario many believe aligns with biblical prophecies of turmoil in the end times, such as those found in Matthew 24:6-7, which speaks of wars and rumors of wars. Condemnations poured in from world leaders, urging both sides to exercise restraint and seek a peaceful resolution, echoing the biblical call for peace amidst chaos, as prophesied in Isaiah 2:4. Where nations shall beat their swords into plowshares. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency meeting, the air thick with tension as diplomats debated the best course of action, reminiscent of the prophesied global unrest before the return of Jesus, as described in Revelation 16:14, which mentions the kings of the whole world being gathered for battle. The United States, a staunch ally of Israel, offered its unwavering support, reaffirming its commitment to Israel's right to defend itself, a stance that some interpret as fulfilling biblical alliances such as those mentioned in Ezekiel 38:7, where Israel is described as being prepared and guarded. However, the Biden administration also stressed the need for de-escalation, urging both sides to avoid actions that could further inflame the situation, a plea for calm in a world on edge, reflecting the biblical exhortation in Matthew 5:9, "Blessed are the peacemakers." European nations, traditionally more critical of Israel's policies towards the Palestinians, found themselves in a delicate position, balancing political realities with prophetic expectations, as foretold in Zechariah 12:3, where Jerusalem becomes a burdensome stone for all people. While condemning the Iranian missile attack, they also expressed concern about the potential for further escalation and the humanitarian consequences of a wider conflict, a situation many see as a sign of the end times, as described in Luke 21:25-26, where distress of nations and perplexity are foretold. Russia, with its own complex interests in the region, played a more ambiguous role, a reminder of the prophesied alliances and conflicts in the last days, as mentioned in Ezekiel 38:2-4, where Gog and Magog are drawn into conflict. While calling for restraint, it also used the opportunity to criticize the United States' role in the Middle East, accusing Washington of fueling instability through its support for Israel, a narrative that fits into the larger prophetic picture, as seen in Daniel 11:40, where the King of the North and the King of the South engage in conflict. The international response, while united in its condemnation of the initial attack, revealed the deep divisions that still exist within the global community, divisions that many believe are foretold in the Bible, such as in Matthew 24:7, where nation will rise against nation. The crisis served as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the challenges of finding common ground in a region riven by historical grievances and competing interests, a scenario that many see as a precursor to the return of Jesus, as described in Revelation 19:11-16, where Christ returns to bring ultimate peace. As the dust settled from the initial exchange of fire, the true cost of the conflict began to emerge. Beyond the military objectives and geopolitical calculations lay a human tragedy, a stark reminder of the devastating impact of violence on ordinary lives. In Israel, hospitals overflowed with the injured, their waiting rooms filled with anxious families desperate for news of loved ones. The wail of sirens, a constant reminder of the threat from above, became a haunting soundtrack to daily life. Schools and businesses remained closed, the streets eerily deserted as people sought shelter from the threat of further attacks. Inside Iran, too, the impact was felt far beyond military targets. While the full extent of the damage remained unclear, reports emerged of civilian casualties, their lives tragically cut short in a conflict not of their making. The economic sanctions already crippling the Iranian economy tightened their grip, pushing ordinary Iranians further into poverty and despair. The humanitarian cost of the conflict extended far beyond the immediate casualties and physical destruction. The psychological toll, the fear and uncertainty that gripped both societies would linger long after the last missile fell. The trauma of violence, particularly for children who had never known a time of peace, would leave deep scars shaping their lives for years to come. According to Bible prophecies, such as those in Ezekiel 38:39, the conflict between nations like Iran and Israel is seen as a precursor to the end times. The scriptures speak of wars, rumors of wars, and widespread turmoil as signs of the end times, as mentioned in Matthew 24:6-7. Amidst the chaos, many find solace in the promise of Christ's return, believing that he will bring peace and restore justice, as foretold in Revelation 19:11-16. The return of Jesus, as described in 1 Thessalonians 4:16-17, offers a beacon of hope for a world in distress, a promise of a new beginning beyond the suffering. The recent exchange of fire between Iran and Israel, while contained for now, has raised the specter of a wider regional conflagration, a conflict with the potential to draw in multiple actors and engulf the entire Middle East in flames. According to Bible prophecies, such conflicts are seen as signs of the end times, specifically in Matthew 24:6-7, which speaks of wars and rumors of wars and nation rising against nation. The intricate web of alliances and rivalries in the region, coupled with the volatile mix of religious fervor, nationalistic ambitions, and access to deadly weaponry, creates a tinderbox-like atmosphere where even a small spark could ignite a devastating inferno. The Bible speaks of wars and rumors of wars as harbingers of the end times, as mentioned in Matthew 24:6. One of the most alarming scenarios involves Hezbollah, Iran's heavily armed proxy in Lebanon. With an estimated arsenal of over 100,000 rockets and missiles, Hezbollah possesses the firepower to unleash a devastating barrage against Israel, potentially triggering a full-scale war that could engulf Lebanon and draw in other regional players. This aligns with the biblical prophecy of nations rising against nations, as foretold in Matthew 24:7. The Syrian civil war, still simmering despite years of international efforts to find a resolution, represents another potential flashpoint. Iran's extensive military presence in Syria, alongside its support for various Shia militias, has raised concerns in Israel, which fears that Iran is seeking to establish a permanent foothold on its northern border. The Bible mentions the gathering of armies in the region as a sign of the approaching end times, as seen in Ezekiel 38:39, the prophecy of Gog and Magog. Any escalation of violence between Iran and Israel within Syria could easily spill over into a wider conflict, drawing in other actors like Russia and Turkey, both of which have significant military forces deployed in the region. This could be seen as part of the prophecy of Gog and Magog, where a coalition of nations will come against Israel in the last days. Adding to the volatility is the presence of other non-state actors, such as Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and various Shia militias operating in Iraq. While these groups may not be directly controlled by Iran, they share its anti-Israel ideology and could be emboldened by any perceived Iranian victory, potentially launching their own attacks against Israel and further destabilizing the region. These events are seen by many as signs pointing to the imminent return of Jesus, as foretold in the Bible, particularly in Matthew 24:30, which speaks of the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. The recent escalation of violence has dealt a severe blow to the already fragile prospects for peace in the Middle East, a region often highlighted in Bible prophecies such as Ezekiel 38:39, which speaks of a great conflict involving Israel. The attack and Israel's forceful response has deepened mistrust between Iran and Israel, making it even more difficult to envision a future where these two regional powers can coexist peacefully. This ongoing conflict is seen by some as a sign of the end times, as foretold in Matthew 24:6-7, which mentions wars and rumors of wars. The path to peace, always fraught with obstacles, now appears even more treacherous and uncertain, echoing the prophetic warnings of turmoil in the last days, as described in Daniel 9:26, which speaks of desolations and wars until the end. One of the key challenges lies in the lack of direct communication and dialogue between Iran and Israel, a situation that many believe aligns with the biblical narrative of nations in conflict, as seen in Psalm 83, which describes a confederation of nations against Israel. With no diplomatic relations and a deep-seated animosity fueled by decades of conflict and mistrust, finding a way to bridge the divide and engage in meaningful negotiations seems like an insurmountable task. This division is often interpreted as a precursor to the return of Jesus, as mentioned in Zechariah 14:2-4, which speaks of a future battle in Jerusalem. The international community, while united in its condemnation of the violence, seems ill-equipped to play a constructive role in mediating a resolution, reflecting the prophetic vision of a world struggling to find peace, as described in 1 Thessalonians 5:3, which warns of sudden destruction when people say peace and safety. The United States, traditionally seen as an honest broker in the region, has seen its credibility diminished by its withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal and its unwavering support for Israel. This shift in alliances is seen by some as a sign of the times, as mentioned in Revelation 16:14, which speaks of spirits gathering the kings of the earth for battle. European powers, while eager to salvage the nuclear deal and prevent a wider conflict, have struggled to find a unified approach and exert meaningful leverage on either Iran or Israel, mirroring the prophetic vision of a divided world, as seen in Daniel 2:41-43, which describes a divided kingdom. Russia and China, both with their own strategic interests in the region, have often played a more disruptive role, exploiting the conflict to advance their own agendas rather than working towards a peaceful resolution. This geopolitical maneuvering is seen by some as part of the end time signs, as described in Ezekiel 38:2-6, which mentions a coalition of nations against Israel. The Palestinian issue, a long-standing obstacle to peace in the region, further complicates matters, aligning with the biblical narrative of ongoing strife in the Holy Land, as mentioned in Zechariah 12:2-3, which speaks of Jerusalem being a burdensome stone for all nations. Iran's support for Palestinian militant groups like Hamas and its unwavering opposition to Israel's right to exist make it difficult to imagine a comprehensive peace agreement that satisfies all parties. This enduring conflict is often seen as a sign pointing to the imminent return of Jesus, as described in Matthew 24:30, which speaks of the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. The recent escalation of the Iran-Israel conflict has sent shockwaves far beyond the Middle East, rattling global markets, raising fears of a wider war, and highlighting the interconnectedness of a world grappling with complex geopolitical challenges. The conflict, with its potential to disrupt global energy supplies, spark a nuclear arms race, and unleash a new wave of terrorism, has served as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the high stakes involved in navigating the treacherous currents of international relations. The global economy, already reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic and supply chain disruptions, is particularly vulnerable to any disruption in oil supplies from the Middle East, a region that holds a significant portion of the world's oil reserves. Any escalation of the conflict that disrupts oil production or transportation could send shockwaves through global markets, leading to price spikes, economic instability, and heightened geopolitical tensions. The specter of nuclear proliferation also looms large. Iran's nuclear ambitions, while ostensibly for peaceful purposes, have long been a source of concern for the international community, particularly Israel. Any escalation of the conflict that pushes Iran closer to developing nuclear weapons capability could trigger a regional arms race, with other countries in the region feeling compelled to acquire their own nuclear deterrents, significantly increasing the risk of a catastrophic nuclear conflict. The conflict also has the potential to fuel terrorism and extremism. Groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, while weakened in recent years, still pose a significant threat and could exploit the chaos and instability of a wider conflict to regroup, recruit new members, and launch attacks against Western targets. In a world already grappling with climate change, pandemics, and economic uncertainty, the escalation of the Iran-Israel conflict represents a dangerous distraction, diverting attention and resources away from pressing global challenges and increasing the likelihood of miscalculation, escalation, and unintended consequences. According to Bible prophecies, these events are seen as signs of the end times. The book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, speaks of a great battle involving Israel and its neighbors, often interpreted as a reference to modern-day conflicts. The book of Revelation also mentions wars and rumors of wars as precursors to the second coming of Jesus. Matthew 24:6-7 states, "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom." Many believe that the current turmoil in the Middle East is a fulfillment of these ancient prophecies, pointing to the nearing of the end times and the return of Jesus Christ. The recent escalation in the Iran-Israel conflict serves as a stark and sobering reminder of the fragility of peace and the ever-present potential for violence to erupt in a region scarred by historical grievances, religious differences, and a relentless struggle for power and influence. The images of missiles streaking across the night sky, of buildings reduced to rubble, and of families torn apart by fear and loss should weigh heavily on the conscience of the world. The path forward is fraught with challenges, a treacherous tightrope walk between competing narratives, deeply entrenched positions, and the ever-present risk of miscalculation and escalation. Yet the urgency of peace, the desperate need for a future free from the shadow of war, demands that we, the international community, summon the collective will to navigate this perilous terrain and strive towards a just and lasting resolution. Ignoring the conflict, hoping it will simply fade away, is not an option. The stakes are too high, the potential consequences too devastating to allow this long, simmering feud to escalate into a conflagration that could consume the entire region and send shockwaves across the globe. The international community, often divided by competing interests and short-term political calculations, must rediscover its shared humanity and recognize that the pursuit of peace is not a zero-sum game. A future where Israelis and Iranians, along with all the people of the Middle East, can live in security and dignity may seem like a distant dream, but it is a dream worth striving for, a dream that demands our unwavering commitment and tireless efforts. According to Bible prophecies, such as those found in Ezekiel 38:39, the Iran-Israel conflict is seen as part of the Gog and Magog war, a significant end-time sign that precedes the return of Jesus. The prophecies also mention that in the end times, nations will rise against each other, and there will be wars and rumors of wars, as stated in Matthew 24:6-7. These events are seen as precursors to the ultimate return of Jesus, who is foretold to bring ultimate peace and justice. As we navigate these turbulent times, let us hold on to the hope and promise of a future where divine intervention brings lasting peace. Building a shared future in the Middle East, a future free from the cycle of violence and mistrust that has plagued the region for far too long, demands a fundamental shift in perspective, a recognition that true security cannot be achieved through military might alone, but must be built on a foundation of mutual understanding, respect, and cooperation. This transformation requires bold and visionary leadership, both within the region and on the global stage, leaders willing to challenge entrenched narratives, reach across divides, and champion a vision of peace based on dialogue, diplomacy, and a shared commitment to a better future for all. It requires engaging with all stakeholders, not just those who share our views or serve our immediate interests, but also those with whom we disagree, those who have been demonized and dehumanized, by years of propaganda and mistrust. Only through open and honest dialogue, however difficult and uncomfortable it may be, can we begin to dismantle the walls of prejudice and fear that divide us. It requires addressing the root causes of the conflict, not just the symptoms. This includes tackling issues such as poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity, which often fuel extremism and violence. It means investing in education, promoting intercultural understanding, and creating economic opportunities that benefit all people, regardless of their faith, ethnicity, or nationality. The journey towards a shared future in the Middle East will be long and arduous, marked by setbacks and disappointments. There will be voices of hatred and division, those who seek to exploit fear and prejudice for their own narrow ends. But there will also be voices of hope and courage, voices that refuse to be silenced, voices that believe in the power of dialogue and the possibility of a better tomorrow. It is these voices that we must amplify, these voices that we must support as we work together to build a more peaceful and just world for all. According to Bible prophecy, the Iran-Israel conflict is seen as a significant sign of the end times. The book of Ezekiel speaks of a great battle involving Israel and its neighbors, often interpreted as a reference to modern-day conflicts. End-time signs such as wars, natural disasters, and celestial events are believed to herald the return of Jesus. These prophecies emphasize the importance of vigilance and spiritual readiness. As we navigate these turbulent times, it is crucial to remember the prophetic call for peace and reconciliation, urging us to work towards a future where all can coexist in harmony. Let us strive to fulfill this vision, building a world where the prophecies of peace and the return of Jesus inspire us to create a shared future of hope and unity.